welcome to Mr. Rafi. We also briefly discussed this morning as well is regarding the economic crisis in Sri Lanka. What has been your experience during this economic crisis regarding BRI debt, especially the restructuring dialogues with China? What has been your experience of dialogue with China, especially at a time when, you are also talking to other multilateral partners? How is your dialogue with China different from your experience with multilateral partners? Because we also have India coming in and helping Sri Lanka very positively. So how do you compare China's role and experience with China vis-a-vis that of multilaterals and India?
So thank you. So regarding the debt, as I mentioned in my talk, if you look at Sri Lanka's debt, the contribution of Chinese debt as far as the bilateral goes is the highest. But overall, it's the commercial market borrowings. But at the same time, some of the borrowings we did from international capital markets was also in certain cases to repay loans taken on a bilateral basis. So that's one thing. But as far as debt negotiations go or the economic crisis goes, I think in 2022, in that period, April to July, it was probably in economic or even overall terms, one of Sri Lanka's darkest times. So at that time, the approach was different. I mean, not any other countries came because we were just at that time, even in July, there was people had overrun the president's palace and, Parliament was also, there were forces trying to enter. So at this time, it was India that came with $4 billion to this thing. So even as our foreign minister, as I said in my talk, that even the Indian finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman, the IMF director had told him that about 75% of her time was spent on trying to get a good deal for Sri Lanka or discussing about that. So that was the sort of emphasis. And $4 billion, is quite a large amount because if you look at Mr. Modi's Micron investment, that's $6 billion. So that's almost 2/3 of the amount. So that's a huge amount. So we have to be fair enough that India stepped in. And also, as I mentioned, the second point, India has been canvassing for Sri Lanka at the multilaterals, like the IMF. We got a more speedier deal done, and one of the first countries to give debt assurance to the IMF was India. And the last probably would be China. So, and the other question about as far as China goes, we still haven't, because led by India, France and Japan, we formed a sort of the official creditor committee. So here again, the invitation was sent to China, but they didn't join. They came in as an observer. So as far as the debt negotiations go, or at the time we were in trouble, I think it's fair enough to say that the immediate neighbor came to our help more.
Yes, and the question that I would like to ask is, how tough is it to negotiate with China on debt restructuring?
So, at the same time, I mean, they have given a 2-year moratorium, but then we are in default, so we are basically not paying any country. So how effective that is always a question. And at the beginning, one of the arguments given by China was that, why should we negotiate our bilateral debt when the multilaterals, such as the World Bank and the ADB, are exempt? So this was their way of putting it that, basically as the largest financer, the World Bank money is basically US money. So they're saying US financing is untouched, but ours is touched. But the counter argument that I would say is that, institutions such as the IMF, especially the IMF, lend to countries. It's the lender of last resort. And when does a lender of last resort lend? It's when countries are desperate. So obviously there is a sort of if you're going to restructure IMF debt, then next time, let's say another country falls into a trap, the IMF won't be able to come in. So as a lender of last resort, of course, its debt can't be this thing. And even World Bank, ADB, they lend to poor countries for development projects. These are not commercial projects. So, of course, they have to keep their credit ratings high so that at AAA, so that the World Bank, the ADB, IMF are funded. So that argument, so it's been a bit of, I wouldn't go too hard on that, but at the same time, to be fair, the Chinese argument is that unlike other countries, they have lent to a lot of many other countries. So if we are going to be like quite lenient on Sri Lanka and give a little, then it's going to set off, because Zambia, Ghana, they're all in the line, and even Pakistan or Egypt, they were at that time close to defaulting. So the argument can be made in that sense, but as far as like going into negotiating, I think at least compared to other countries, it's been a bit tough.
Okay. Now coming to Nepal, I would like to ask,